naredite si lep dan in lep večer. Prelistajte našo knjigico s citati za dobro leto dni. Naročite jo na 3x2.maratonpozitivnepsihologije.si. Poglejte na zavihek Trgovina. Čudovito darilo za vas in vaše. Vsako soboto ob 19. novo predavanje na kanalu Pozitivna psihologija za boljše življenje.
V naslednjem predavanju šnelkursa, ki vas bo dvignil iz povprečja oziroma e-konference o kreativnosti, pa bodo v ospredju novi procesi vse od inoviranja do reinoviranja. Reinoviranje je pismenost 21. stoletja, je veščina in proces. Edinstven za vsakega posameznika in za vsako organizacijo, je pa tudi način razmišljanja, ki ga moramo obuditi in tudi razviti. Kaj je reinoviranje? Kaj lahko reinoviramo? Kako dobri ste v reinoviranju in še mnogo več? Bosta v angleškem jeziku odgovorili Ina Kukovič Borovnik, ustanoviteljica nesvetovalnega podjetja Bela voda in prva certificirana coachinja za reinoviranje na svetu po pristopu Chief Reinvention Officer, ter poleg nje doktorica Nadja Zhexembayeva. Ona je gurujka, tudi kraljica, kot so jo poimenovali mediji, ustanoviteljica Akademije za reinoviranje, predavateljica, TED-govornica in avtorica mnogih knjig, na katero drugo temo kot reinoviranja. Ina and Nadya, the virtual stage is yours.
Hvala, Aleš, in dobrodošli vsi na malce drugačni, seveda kreativni konferenci, šnelkurs za dvig iz povprečja, kot smo sedaj poimenovali. Živimo res v takih časih, da je vse zelo drugače in vsi se učimo delati vse drugače. In sem ful vesela, da sva danes z Nadjo skupaj z vami. Sva. In bom od zdaj naprej govorila v angleščini, sicer Nadja razume slovensko kar dobro, a ne, Nadja? 10 let. Slabo, kar dobro. Ampak vseeno bova preklopili na angleščino za danes, za naš pogovor oziroma predavanje na temo reinoviranja oziroma novih procesov. So reinvention, new processes from innovation to reinvention.
My pleasure to be here. Hi everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Dobar dan and dobrodošli. We are indeed speaking about reinvention today, and we will try to dance between different topics and go from theory to practice and also share a little bit of shocking data. Our plan is to wake each other up, including ourselves, and then give you some pragmatic answers to how do we thrive in chaos. Not just survive, but thrive in chaos. And that's where reinvention comes in. So let me very quickly share my screen and get us going. So we are gathering here today on this eve not exactly the eve, the late evening at the end of this long, long day we call COVID-19. For a couple of months now, the whole world has been living in this endless repetitive story of pandemic. And this particular pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, highlighted the era in which we're in, the era of uncertainty. And in the middle of uncertainty, in the middle of turbulence, the important thing is not the uncertainty itself. The danger is not the turbulence itself. It's using the old tools and old approaches, and most importantly, old mindset when dealing with the turbulence. So I want to highlight few of the things that keep reminding me and shocking me and helping all of our global networks adjust to change in a whole different way. So the first thing, of course, that is happening in minds of many people in business is thinking of COVID-19 as this rare, unusual, unexpected, and completely unpredictable event. We call that in science Black Swan, and it comes, of course, from a wonderful book called Black Swan on the idea of completely unpredictable events that create significant turbulence. The reality, however, is this particular crisis was not a black swan. It was not unforeseeable and it was not unpredictable. It was predicted again and again by many scientists and also by many think tanks. One of such think tanks is the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. And the World Economic Forum publishes the most important risks for humanity every year. And this is the map of such risks for 2019, the global risk landscape, top 30 risks. And you will see immediately that on this map, a pandemic such as COVID-19 was not only expected, but it was not even marked as the most dangerous thing. Here it is highlighted in red. Things like climate change were predicted and expected to be much more riskier for the world and for business. So COVID-19 was not a surprise. It was spoken about, it was predicted. And if you are following the science of climate change, you know that we should expect many more pandemics because we're changing both the temperature and the biodiversity, which creates new opportunities for new infections. Another question that keeps floating around as companies trying to figure out how to live and thrive in chaos, the other question is, when are we going back to normal? So when is this whole thing over, this whole ordeal? When are we going back to normal, as if there was ever normal? And I'm sorry to tell you, the answer is never. We are not going back to normal, and data after data, survey after survey suggests that the turbulence is here to stay. For example, the International Monetary Fund is publishing its 60th uncertainty index in 2020. It covers the era from 1959 to 2019, 60 years of measuring uncertainty. And you will notice that just in the 2019, we already reached the highest. Before COVID-19, before the craziness was oil prices, before the world economic crisis that is looming on top of us right now, we already reached the level of uncertainty that is about 100 years higher than, let's say, 1986. And this is here to stay. There's absolutely no signs that the uncertainties we're facing in economic, social, monetary, politically, cultural, ecologic dimensions are going away anytime soon. We're just adding to the pile of uncertainty again and again. But if we come back to business and the economics, we treat change as something that happens very rarely, and we think of crisis and disruption as something that happens relatively rarely as well. So if I was to ask you, how many economic crises have the world experienced since 1988? If I was to ask you, what would be your guess? If you were to guess, give me a number, what would be your guess?
We talked about this before when we were preparing, and I'll be honest, I said 10, because I was thinking big global crises.
Yeah, and it's natural to think that crises happen rarely. So how many of them could have happened in 31, 32 years? No more than 10, right? The reality is, however, not only we had massive global crises, but we also had industrial crises. For example, I worked with companies in 2000, 2001 global coffee crisis. I worked with companies in 2013, 2016 global mining and metals crisis. There are a lot of industrial crises. There are a lot of regional crises, and there are a lot of country crises. And in this new interconnected world, that means that a crisis that is happening seemingly far away from you can touch your industry, your supply chain, your customers, your banks. You are not immune to something that happens far in a different corner of the earth. And just to look at the number of country level crises, that number since 1988 is 469. 469 country-level crises. That means there's one crisis every 25 days. This is a massive, massive scale and speed of change, the kind we have never seen before, and the kind that tells us that we are no longer available and we cannot, it's no longer acceptable to treat change as a project, as something that happens when crisis happens once in a blue moon, and then we change, we adapt, and we live happily ever after. No, it's no longer okay to buckle our belts and tighten our belts and say we will survive and then the things will go back to normal. This idea that we need to concentrate on fixing today, surviving today, is not viable. We need to think simultaneously in two dimensions, fixing today, but also making sure that we are building the foundations for tomorrow. And here, unfortunately, why so many companies do not weather the storm well is because they end up into this quadrant, the Titanic syndrome quadrant, where companies only see the disaster when it hits them, when they become victims of their own arrogance, their own attachment to past success, their own status quo, and of course the inability to see, to anticipate change and adapt to it. But also another scenario that we see a lot is this endless firefighting, where companies are fixing something in the short term, but really damaging the ability of the company to survive in the long term. Fixing the problem today with a little band-aid, but creating significant problems for tomorrow. So tomorrow it's a new fire, and a new fire, and a new fire, non-stop. We also don't want to see blind idealism, where companies are shooting for the stars so far away from reality that they are building the future while jeopardizing the today. That is not sustainable. So what is the answer? What is sustainable? That is our definition of reinvention. The purpose, the measure of when the company reinvents successfully. When have you reinvented is when you were able to solve today's issue while also building up your ability to thrive tomorrow. And you right here might be wondering, why in the heck are we using the word reinvention and not the sexier word that's been in every publication, innovation? And Ina will help us understand that choice better.
Thank you, Nadya. And before we go on, I felt like, we didn't take the time to talk about how we started. And I'm not taking away from the thought, but this is to the point. Innovation is such a hot word, and it's been around for decades, and it's been the winning trophy of we just need to innovate and you will thrive, and there'll be special teams who will deal with that. And somewhere along the way, we met each other. I met Nadya as my professor, and we felt this need of, this is not enough. Innovation is not enough. This is not for everyone. And we need something that is for everyone. And we need to go beyond looking at change just as a project. And just a second, let me share my screen. Innovation, right? Why not innovation? There's an old theory actually that helped us explain that. That's coming from the 60s, Nadya, if I'm not mistaken now, that says only 2.5% of people, so that's the law of diffusion of innovation, only 2% of people watching this right now in your team, in your organization, are capable of innovation. That means coming up with this amazing disruptive idea that changes industries, that changes global landscapes, that can give you a competitive advantage for years, which is like a century today, counting business time, right? Only 2.5% of people actually have the capacity, like we say, in their brains to think in abstract ways most of the time, to be able to come up with these kind of ideas. So that's innovators. And as a Slovenian, I know we have a lot of innovators in our country per capita, but still not all of us are innovators. The good news is all of us are reinventors. Every one of us, each one of us is capable of constantly adapting to change, reimagining things, making them better. And that's the essence of reinvention. So there was not a lot of, let's say, data on reinvention in that sense. So we are right now also in the midst of our second global reinvention survey that you can also hop onto. We'll share that with the team. That was asking, how often do you need to reinvent in your company to survive? And notice, to survive, not thrive in change. So we looked at that from the perspective of a business cycle. Most of you right now looking at this have seen this cycle somewhere on the road that really looks a lot like a life cycle, really. There's always a birth, there's a startup phase. We all know that's quite messy and unorganized and chaotic, and there's beauty, but there's a lot of difficulty. Then there's growth, where you see there's something being proven on the market, people like it. And then there's this golden maturity phase, the cash cow years, right? We love the cash cow years because that's where you get to know how you do things, you have the processes in place, it's a nice time. And then there's a decline after that. So the interesting part, and some of the statistics that we want to share with you, and that our survey also shows, is how these cycles have drastically shortened in a very short period of time. We are talking a few decades here, okay? So if we look at that, at the beginning of the 80s, the cycle of a life, of an organization, of a business model, of a process, of a product, if you want, was 75 years. 75 years. So I was born in the 80s. That meant that most of my environment was saying, all you need to do is go and be very good at one single thing. Find a company or organization where you're going to go and work for them for practically all of your life. And most likely you won't see any huge changes happening, right? 80s. So just a decade later, those cycles shortened drastically. Things like internet happened, China opened up, Berlin Wall fell down. You know, all those big macroeconomic things happened. And the cycle came to 15 years. That's a huge difference in the pace of change and in the way we look at change. So back to our survey, we did our survey because there was no number saying how much is this cycle today. And you know, you can be guessing, you might be hearing it from us somewhere because we talk about it a lot. Today, the cycle on average in industries is 7 years, which means you need to reinvent yourself and your organization every 3.5 years. Now, that's a very high pace of change that we are still not used to. Again, depending on the industries, but this is an average rate that we are seeing. And I want to bring in this cycle, the reinvention cycle, or a process, if you want, that's very unique, again, to each industry and to each organization that you are coming from right now. And we all know there's a phase of normal stagnation when things are okay, there is no COVID around, there is no big crisis around. And then there's a phase when we lead to a change, and that's chaos, that's rebirth, that's something new. And from that, we need to land all of those ideas and all of those newness and manage the complexity to come into this new phase. So from this, I always like to see and say that this creates kind of a heartbeat, right? A heartbeat of an organization, of yourself, if you want. And today, what we want to kind of give you and leave you with in terms of thinking about your own reinvention process are two things. First, even if you look at this cycle or this scheme or picture, it can be a beautiful way to enter a conversation with your team. Just to say, look, this is a normal life cycle of anything. It's also of our team, of our organization. Where do you think we are right now? Are we more in the leading change phase, or are we more in times of managing complexity? I know it feels very simple and obvious, but you would be surprised how different your team and your colleagues might be looking at this process in the same moment as you are. Or maybe a different department, you know, maybe you in the team, you are all into leading change, but the department next door can see you very differently. And it's very good to have this kind of knowing where you are in the cycle conversation. And the second part that with Nadya, we talked about what would be really useful to give you today from the buffet of frameworks and tools that we are working on and with right now, was focused, and we decided to focus on one thing and one, if you want, mistake that we noticed right now that's happening, especially after COVID. And that is changing too much, too big at once. Right? There's a shock, there's, you know, we need to adjust, we need to change everything. Of course, everything is changed and nothing will be normal, Nadya, like you said before. But, you know, if we look at this process of reinvention, the cycle we looked at before as a heartbeat, if you put too much of everything at once to your body, your heartbeat is going to be far from healthy. Your heartbeat is actually very much endangered to go flat, right? So in a good intention of adapting and trying to change, there's too many organizations trying to change too much, too big at once. So what we're offering here today is our reinvention portfolio canvas. That's, as we said, a great way to just start and see where are we with this change. We keep talking about it, we keep changing things, but how much are we really changing? How big is it? So as you can see on the canvas, on one premise, you have the reinvention scope, as we call it, being your project can be something within your organization or a subsystem, maybe even your team. A project of change can be systemic, so again, organizational or industrial maybe, or it can be an ecosystem, which means, you know, even bigger than your industry kind of change. And on the second premise, you have a rating of how big the scope, the nature of the change is, the reinvention. Is it incremental? Is it intermediate? Or is it radical? So really, really disrupting any kind of this. So a great way to enter and see how much change you have right now in your organization is to sit down with your team and ask people to come and bring the Post-its and say which project is a project of change right now in my department or in our organization, and try to place it on this canvas. Yeah, so you get kind of an overview of where you are. So it might look like this, right? This is now, of course, very nicely kind of distributed way of how much of these projects and the level of change they're bringing into your organization is like kind of evenly distributed. It feels kind of nice, right? This is what you would like to have, right? And the question is, how much of renewal does that bring you, right? Because if you look at it evenly distributed, nicely all over the canvas, it gives you like a steady notion, even in my tone of speaking about it, right? So it depends, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It depends, that's what I'm trying to say. Because if you would add a few more or try to push a few more projects on the other side of the canvas, that would give you a little bit more life, or also a bit more chaos on the other side, right? So it's good to have it all over the place. And there's a reason why they're in blue and red, yeah? Okay, because I want to bring us back to the cycles. So if imagine you have this portfolio of changes listed and printed out on this canvas, you need to ask yourself, how much of all of this do we need, right? How much of all of it can we take? Because I'm sure by now, in a lot of your organizations, people feel burned out. It's been a lot, right? And it's a very, very important notice to have, that we cannot go on that pace all the time, right? So we cannot have a full canvas like this all the time, because it's going to be a heart attack, right? So there's a line in between the blue and the red. And I will bring us now to the cycles to explain why this line matters. Depending on the cycle you are in as an organization, as an industry, depending how you look into it, you need to know when to have more renewal, more of the projects that are breaking, yeah, that are bringing the fresh energy, and when do you need to focus more on keeping things as they are and focus on continuity. In a cycle, as you see them here, the red dots, the ones that are pushing, that go like, we need more, right? It's an energy. We need more energy. We need more, a higher heartbeat, are happening on the highest, on the maturity phase of a cycle, depending on, again, where your organization or your industry is at. And that's when you are really focusing on renewal. Or is it slowly growing up? And when you're slowly growing up, you don't want to have too much change happening. You don't want to add more and more, because you just got into knowing what is bringing you prosperity. So in terms of growth, when you're growing in the cycle, the priority is continuity. And when you're high on a peak of a cycle, the priority is renewal. And mind you, you could look at these cycles not just from the whole organization, you could also look at it from one product point of view or from one service point of view. That's why we continue, right? There's always a new cycle, because the ideal point would be to start renewing, as you can see up here. Yeah, you can see my cursor, Nadya? Can you? Yeah, so if it's like, this is the time when you want to start up something new, right? Oh, it's the end of the slideshow. Yeah. So the when is very crucial. So I'm just checking the time, how much we are in and out of our recording as we're preparing this. It's good. Yeah. So two useful tools we think that are a very good way to enter into conversation of, okay, in our process of change, where are we? You know, besides the fact that COVID was a chaos for everyone, and that's a firefighting mode anyhow, right? Looking it from a bigger perspective, where are we? And then secondly, what are we changing? And how much of this is really bringing us value, depending on where in the cycle we are. Nadya, would you like to add something? Yeah, please.
For us, the most important thing is to remember that reinvention is a system. It's a process. It's not a project. So all the tools we are designing are meant for you to build your own system. Your uniqueness, the uniqueness of your industry, your company, your region, is unlike any other company in the world. So only you know what kind of process you need. But the tools we bring are conversation starters, are some sort of a bridge that allows you to align the whole team in one direction. So any visual you've seen today can be used as a conversation starter. It can be used to create the common language and a common mindset in relationship to change, and then have a one place where you can see what's our reinvention portfolio looks like. Do we even know how much change are we driving our company, and what's the level of intensity of that change? Do we look at the map, at the whole portfolio before we agree to accept another project? Or is our system already overwhelmed? And where are we with the cycle, so that we understand that this is the time to switch the gear and go from continuity to renewal, or vice versa, to come down, we already renewed enough, and now settle down and create more precise systems and processes. So it's all in the dance and the flow, and your job and your opportunity is to create that flow, create that process of reinvention.
Yes, and it's, again, there's no cookie cutter. Unfortunately, it isn't. That's why we call them like support systems and support frameworks for your own. And again, you'll be surprised just by opening up. You know, it's like, I hear that a lot. We hear that a lot. Oh, everybody talks about change, and we all know we need to change and all of that. But yet, our research also shows we don't really commit time, people, money, if you want, on a regular basis as a normal thing. Change is not a project, right? To deal with all of the changes and to manage this balance of new and old. So with that, we hope we gave you food for thought and something practical to bring home and test and converse with your teams. And we also invite you to join our communities. We have a rich reinvention society on Facebook. There's so much we're giving out all the time. There's so much knowledge from all around the world that can support your reinvention projects and processes. So welcome to join us there. And
please participate in our research. We will also make sure to share links to our research throughout the community, and see if you would like to give a little bit of insights. We would be happy to include it and share your insights in the reports we put out.
Dodajam še nekaj na temo reinoviranja in pogleda. Vedno imam rada to sliko srčnega utripa kot prispodobo za reinoviranje, ker je to zame prispodoba tega, kako pogosto, kaj naj reinoviramo, kdaj naj reinoviramo, s kom naj reinoviramo. To so vse pomembna vprašanja. In v tem 10-minutnem dodatku, danes imam prižgano uro, da ne bom predolga ali prekratka, bi se rada dotaknila tega, kaj reinovirati, kaj spreminjati, in tega, kako to implementirati, kako vse te ideje spreminjanja imeti nekako na pregledu in hkrati v nekih okvirih. Ker prosto reinoviranje brez meja je lahko za vas ali za vašo organizacijo seveda uničujoče. Zato kratko en preprost pregled ali pa način gledanja na to, kaj lahko reinovirate v vaši organizaciji. Namreč naša raziskava je pokazala, da ko gre za večje organizacije, čez 1000 zaposlenih, je običajno ključeno ali pa prvi ključni korak to, zakaj sploh reinovirati. Medtem ko v vseh manjših organizacijah je ključno vprašanje, kaj naj spreminjamo in kako, seveda. In en način pogleda na to, kaj reinovirati, lahko gledamo na takem grafu, kjer je ena premisa čas, druga premisa pa kompleksnost. In kot vidite, na nek način je v tem grafu prikazano, da je najlažje spreminjati procese, se pravi, se boljše organizirati, biti bolj učinkoviti, bolj agilni, ker je to zelo vezano najprej na vašo interno organizacijo. Ja? Stvar vaše komunikacije, vašega dogovora. Medtem ko gre že pri spreminjanju produkta za bolj kompleksno reinoviranje, ker je običajno vpleteno več dejavnikov, na katere tudi vi sami morda ne morete vplivati, so vključeni že drugi deležniki in tako. Tretje in tudi z rdečo obarvano je spreminjanje poslovnega modela. Nekaj, o čemer se v poslovni skupnosti in tudi širše govori v zadnjem desetletju ogromno. Pa ni tako zelo enostavno, kot se zdi. Poslovnih modelov je zelo veliko že znanih, ampak bolj pomembno je to, kako spretni ste vi sami v spreminjanju le-tega. Se pravi, da imate en poslovni model za določene kupce ali za določene trge, vaša vrednost, ki jo pa ustvarjate, ostaja pa ista oziroma jasna. In seveda v kontekstu kompleksnosti in časa je najtežje spreminjati kulturo. Mi uporabljamo za lažji pogled in morda vam bo koristna tako imenovana Reinvention map oziroma zemljevid reinoviranja, ki nekako se gradi od srčike, zakaj kreirate neko vrednost navzven v vprašanja kot kakšno vrednost ustvarjate, kako jo ustvarjate, kje jo ustvarjate, za koga jo ustvarjate. In zelo uporabna mapa oziroma zemljevid, se opravičujem zaradi prevodov, da pogledate, ali se še česa nismo vprašali. In seveda najprej in zelo pomembno začnete pri tem, zakaj sploh ustvarjate to, kar ustvarjate. Tako da to vam lahko pustim tudi kasneje in lahko morda še o tem debatiramo. Običajno pa je to, kaj ustvarjamo, zakaj ustvarjamo, s kom ustvarjamo, zapisano v naši strategiji. Neki zgodbi, neki knjigi, nekemu zemljevidu tega, kje smo in kam želimo potovati. In o tem sva govorili že skupaj z Nadjo, čas spreminjanja teh strategij, ki so včasih na nek način se postavljale za 5-10 let, morda celo več, se je bistveno skrajšal. In zato je, bi rekla, naše področje reinoviranja poskuša pripeljati orodja, ki bi pomagala dovoliti več tako imenovane emergent strategy, se pravi, nastajajoče se strategije in ne postavljene strategije. To sta dve veliki šoli, bi rekla, na temo strategije, ki jih poznamo. Michael Porter je tisti, ki je oče strategije oziroma strateškega razmišljanja v večini poslovnega sveta, ki smo se ga tudi vsi učili, ki pač jasno pove, da moramo vedeti, kje smo in kam želimo priti, potem pa najdemo neko pot do tam. Medtem ko je Henry Mintzberg, profesor, ki je na nek način ali še vedno raziskuje tako imenovano nastajajočo se strategijo, ki pride zaradi nepredvidljivih sprememb, zaradi velikih sprememb na trgu. In tako kot sva že govorila zopet z Nadjo v prvem delu, je to sedaj naša normala, naša nova realnost. Kar ne pomeni, da nimamo postavljene strategije, kam želimo priti, samo pustiti moramo več priložnosti za nastajajočo novo strategijo in skupaj potem nekako pridemo v neko novo stanje. In za namen te, bi rekla, pregleda reinoviranja ali pa projektov reinoviranja, projektov, ki dovoljujejo, ki so odziv na spreminjajoče se stanje v okolju, smo razvili v skupnosti Chief Reinvention Officer poseben canvas, ki ga imenujemo Stellar Canvas. Vas morda spominja na business model canvas, ki dovoljuje vam, lahko samo pri sebi, lahko v ekipi, lahko tudi v celi organizaciji, torej stvar uporabe skupnega orodja in skupnega jezika. je lahko pripomoček za pregled vseh projektov, ki spreminjajo, torej na različnih nivojih seveda, in dovoljuje pregled v kontekstu tega, da se ve, kdo je odgovoren za katerega od teh projektov, ki se odzivajo na spremembe, kdaj se ga preverja, kakšni so limiti teh projektov. Zdaj, v tej sliki je morda težje razumeti, zato bom pokazala raje drug čistejši pogled. Vse ta model boste dobili tudi vi sami na vaše e-maile, oziroma lahko tudi pač potem po predavanju. Ključno je, da je zelo jasna vaša začetna pozicija. Zdaj, morda se zdi to nekako pričakovano, pa vendar velikokrat pri delu z organizacijami ugotovimo, da že znotraj ekip ni usklajeno stanje, recimo za sektor določenega kupca, za določeno storitev. In zelo dobro je tukaj začeti, recimo vzemimo si primer storitve za vaš B2B sektor, se pravi za business to business sektor, katere imate, koliko prihodka od njih dobite, vse te postulate na nek način v temu začetni poziciji, starting point, opredelite. Potem pa so na drugi strani te zvezdice, rang zvezdic, ki vam dovoljuje, kam želite priti pri razvoju teh obstoječih, recimo, storitev za B2B. In ni samo ena točka tista, k kateri želite priti. Recimo, ena izmed je od 5% dohodka želimo priti do minimalno 20 do 80% recimo dohodka od storitev iz sektorja B2B. Recimo naslednja je različni trgi, na katere želimo priti. Naslednja odzvest je lahko, kakšne kupce si želimo znotraj tega. Kakšen je minimum in kakšen je maksimum, recimo, dohodka teh kupcev, ki bi jim prodajali neke storitve. Potem, zdaj pa imam 10 minut, kar pomeni, da sem že malce čez, bom dokončala vseeno, morda bo ok. Znotraj tega moramo postaviti neke limite, kako bomo prišli do tja. A veste, če ni jasno, da je naš budžet omejen, če ni jasno, da je naš čas omejen, če ni jasno, da je recimo kupna moč našega kupca nekako malce omejena oziroma opredeljena, je zelo težko potem implementirati neke ideje. Potem pa znotraj tega kanvasa, ko smo določili začetno pozicijo, rang, kam želimo iti, limite, znotraj katerih želimo ustvarjati, se lahko znotraj le-teh postavijo posamezne aktivnosti. Aktivnosti so v bistvu vaše reinovacijske ideje, če želite, ki morajo biti seveda dovolj specifične, vezane na to, kako bi vi lahko prišli do željenega stanja, nekega širine željenega stanja. In potem se za vsako od teh aktivnosti določi tudi čas tako imenovanega reviewja, se pravi pregleda aktivnosti, ki mora biti zelo pogost, glede na intenzivnost sprememb. In v tem reviewju se določi, kdo dela na tej aktivnosti, kakšen KPI, se pravi Key Performance Indicator, se bo uporabljal za točno to določeno aktivnost, ker če je nek projekt zelo v povoju, je težko dati nek revenue stream za uspeh tega projekta, je lahko nekaj drugega. Kdaj se boste dobili z njimi? In na podlagi tega lahko vidite, da imate recimo za določeno področje naštete neke aktivnosti, recimo začnete z 10 idejami, ki reinovirajo vaš servis v B2B sektorju,
In sproti potem v valih, ki tečejo od 1 mesec do 3 mesecev, recimo, ocenjujete, kakšni so rezultati teh aktivnosti, da jih pravočasno opustite ali reinovirate njih same. To se nam zdi uporabno orodje, res še enkrat naj poudarjam kot pregled nad vsem tem, kar spreminjate. Ne nad tistimi stvarmi, za katere veste, kako jih že počnete, ampak tiste, ki se odzivajo na neke spremembe, ki jih opazujete v okolju za vaš določen sektor, za vaš določen stranko, recimo. Ker zelo pogosto se izgubi nadzor, tako v kontekstu, kako veliko se lahko igramo in reinoviramo, do tega, kdo je odgovoren za izvedbo neke ideje.
Kreativna e-konferenca ali šnelkurs za dvig iz povprečja v 4 dejanjih je tako pri koncu. 7 odličnih strokovnjakov in govorcev vam je predalo svoja znanja in izkušnje na področjih razvoja novih produktov, storitev, orodij in 4. procesov. Sedaj ste oboroženi, a brez uporabe teh orožij, ali bolje rečeno orodij, bo vse skupaj povsem zaman. Zato ne odlašajte in že jutri uporabite tisto orodje, ki vam najbolj pade v roko, predvsem pa bodite v cvetju.
Naredite si lep dan in lep večer. Prelistajte našo knjigico s citati za dobro leto dni. Naročite jo na 3x2.maratonpozitivnepsihologije.si. Poglejte na zavihek Trgovina. Čudovito darilo za vas in vaše. Vsako soboto ob 19. novo predavanje na kanalu Pozitivna psihologija za boljše življenje.